It was supposed to be simple. A quick trip back to the place he once called home, a few handshakes, a polite round of applause, and maybe, just maybe, a moment to show the world he hadn't completely drifted away. But when Prince Harry set foot on British soil again, reality hit harder than any critic ever could. One late-night joke, just a single clipped sentence from Graham Norton, managed to slice through the last threads holding his public image together. You could almost feel the collective intake of breath when Norton quipped that Harry might be too scared to show up, afraid the crowd would salute, just not him. The studio erupted with laughter, but behind every chuckle was an unmistakable truth. The prince who once inspired the nation had become its punchline. And that was just the beginning. The Invictus Games have always been Harry's proudest legacy, a cause he built from nothing, fueled by the same grit and loyalty he once wore like a badge. Back in 2014, when he first unveiled the Games, there was no doubt he meant it. It wasn't just a royal duty, it was personal, a tribute to the brothers and sisters in arms who fought beside him, the wounded warriors he vowed never to abandon. For years, Invictus was the one thing no one could fault him for. But in 2027, the Games will return to British soil, this time in Birmingham. And what should have been a triumphant homecoming has turned into a public reckoning. Everyone expected Harry to stand proudly at the center of it all. Through all, the Invictus Games were his idea, his mission. He even released a statement when Birmingham won the bid, praising the city's history of military service, calling it the perfect host to celebrate resilience and honor sacrifice. But behind those carefully crafted words lurked a fear he couldn't shake. A fear that maybe, just maybe, he'd step onto that stage and hear something worse than booze. Silence. Indifference. The kind of cold shoulder that can shatter any illusion of relevance. And he's not the only one dreading it. Inside Buckingham Palace, there's no rush to mend fences. Last year, when Invictus celebrated its 10th anniversary, not a single senior royal showed up. King Charles, Queen Camilla, William, and Kate all kept their distance, citing packed schedules and private obligations. But everyone knew better. The Netflix specials, the memoir that laid bare family wounds, the relentless press leaks, it all added up to one unspoken decision. No more cover. No more polite smiles in front of the cameras. No more pretending everything was fine. The message was painfully clear. If Harry wanted to stand by Invictus, he'd be standing alone. Yet, even as royal aides whispered that no one from the family would attend in 2027, rumors began to swirl. Maybe Harry would send personal invitations, extend an olive branch, try to stitch something back together. But when the dust settled, it turned out those invitations didn't exist. Organizers confirmed that no invites had been sent, not to athletes, not to sponsors, not to the family. Nothing. The so-called gesture of goodwill was just another hollow headline. And every time he stayed silent, every time he avoided clarity, the disappointment grew. It wasn't just about pride. For King Charles, Invictus represented the last sliver of common ground he shared with his son. He once called it one of Harry's most noble achievements, proof that he could channel his restless spirit into something bigger than himself. But now, even that shared legacy seemed to be crumbling. Behind palace walls, Charles reportedly called Harry's behavior disgraceful, especially after everything the family had endured. The cancer diagnoses, the stress of public scrutiny, the constant feeling that their private tragedies had become the world's favorite soap opera. At the very least, the king expected a show of unity. Instead, Harry slipped in and out of the country without so much as a handshake. Meanwhile, William was done trying. Friends close to the Prince of Wales said he'd extended more olive branches than he could count, only to watch them wither in the California sun. The memoir's unflinching critiques, the documentaries that portrayed the royal family as an ancient machine built on cruelty, all of it left scars. William had once believed they could find common ground through Invictus. Now, he sees Harry's hesitation as the final break. To him, it's not about logistics or security concerns. It's about loyalty. And Harry, in William's eyes, has none left to give. But the royal family wasn't the only group feeling betrayed. The veterans who had stood with Harry from the very start were now grappling with their own disappointment. For them, Invictus was never about celebrity or headlines. It was about purpose. It was about the quiet understanding that no matter how broken you felt, you weren't alone. And when Harry drifted away, so did a little bit of that belief. One Royal Marine, a man who'd competed in 3 Invictus Games, put it bluntly, "He was one of us. Now he's just another Hollywood name who dipped his toe into our world when it suited him." That kind of disillusionment isn't easily undone. And every day Harry remained silent, the bitterness spread. Behind closed doors in Montecito, the atmosphere was reportedly tense. Advisors were stuck in a holding pattern, unsure whether to encourage Harry to face the music or to keep him safely tucked away behind California gates. On the surface, the Sussexes still projected the image of a couple committed to service. But behind the scenes, their brand was fraying. Podcast deals were canceled. The Netflix projects were stalling. Even Spotify had quietly walked away. And without those glossy partnerships, the public had started to ask a brutal question. What do Harry and Meghan stand for anymore? As the Invictus Games inched closer, that question only grew louder. Adding to the awkwardness was the timing. The final day of the 2027 Games would fall on Queen Camilla's 80th birthday. A detail that, for the king, provided an effortless excuse not to attend. As one palace insider said, it was too convenient to ignore. Camilla's milestone celebration would give the royals a polite way to sidestep any awkward public appearances with Harry. And if the king chose to prioritize a family party over Invictus, no one could really blame him. After all, how many times can you extend your hand to someone determined to slap it away? Out in the public, opinions weren't any kinder. Recent polls painted a devastating picture. Nearly half of Britain viewed Harry unfavorably. Only about a quarter still saw him in a positive light. And when asked if he should ever return to royal duties, most people didn't hesitate to say no. Even in the United States, where Harry and Meghan had carefully curated an image of themselves as modern philanthropists, skepticism was growing. Commentators on social media were no longer shy about calling out the gap between the Sussexes' words and their actions. Memes calling Harry the California Duke spread like wildfire. TikTok videos spliced footage of him in uniform next to images of luxury jets and sprawling mansions. And every viral clip came with the same mocking caption: "Service means showing up." The idea that he could preach sacrifice while living in Hollywood luxury didn't sit right with people, especially veterans who remembered the early days when Harry was always front and center, sleeves rolled up, ready to listen. And then there was Meghan. Her absence was as loud as any headline. Years ago, she'd been an enthusiastic supporter, smiling beside Harry at every Invictus event. But now she was nowhere to be seen. No social media posts about the games. No statements of solidarity. Nothing. Insiders claimed she'd warned Harry against returning to the UK at all, arguing that it would only fuel more tabloid frenzy and unravel whatever goodwill they'd built in America. To some, that was a pragmatic strategy. To others, it was something colder, a calculated decision to leave behind the very cause that had once given them purpose. For the veterans who'd believed in Harry, that felt like betrayal. One military medic who'd volunteered at 3 Invictus Games didn't mince words. She was there for the spotlight. Where is she now that it's uncomfortable? Even the British press, which had once tiptoed around the couple's sensitivities, began to shift their tone. Opinion columns called Harry a man adrift, unable to commit fully to anything: his family, his country, or the very community he claimed to champion. They questioned whether he'd ever find his way back to the ideals he once embodied. And the silence kept growing. If Harry thought staying quiet would make the problem go away, he was mistaken. Behind palace walls, officials were already preparing for the fallout. One aide reportedly said, "We won't cover for him anymore. If he doesn't show up, he'll own that failure." To the royal family, it wasn't just a missed opportunity. It was the final proof that Harry had chosen a new life, one that no longer included them or the sacrifices they shared. And if he believed he could drift in and out of duty when it suited him, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Because for all the talk of security concerns and scheduling conflicts, the real issue was far simpler. Harry was afraid of being booed, afraid of standing on that stage in Birmingham and realizing the cheers were gone, afraid of confirming what he already suspected, that the country he once served no longer saw him as one of their own. And for a man who'd built his identity around loyalty and camaraderie, that kind of rejection cut deeper than any tabloid headline. The veterans, the very people Invictus was created to honor, were left in limbo. Organizers and donors whispered among themselves, unsure how to plan an event without knowing if its founder would even show up. Every time someone asked for confirmation, Harry's team responded with the same vague assurances. No one believed them. As one Invictus volunteer put it, "If you can't say you're coming, you're not coming." In the end, that's what this story has always been about. Presence. The willingness to stand in front of the people who once cheered for you and show them you still care. That you haven't forgotten where you came from or the promises you made. That when the applause dies down and the cameras turn away, you're still there, committed, unflinching, true to the mission. But for Harry, that moment of truth is almost here. 2027 Invictus Games are coming, whether he's ready or not. And if he stays in California, if he lets the silence speak for him, the story will be set in stone. He will not be remembered as the prince who led from the front, but as the man who turned his back when it mattered most. In the end, legacy isn't about carefully worded statements or glossy interviews. It's about showing up. And if Harry can't find the courage to stand beside the people who once believed in him, then maybe the laughter Graham Norton unleashed wasn't really a joke at all. Maybe it was the sound of the last bit of respect slipping away. If you ask the people who knew Harry back then, before the interviews, before the glossy photo shoots, before the long flights to Montecito, they'll tell you he wasn't always this way. There was a time when he seemed more real, more approachable, more grounded. A time when he wore his uniform not as a prop, but as a symbol of solidarity with men and women who'd been tested in ways most of us can't even imagine. Back then, he'd show up to hospital wards unannounced, no cameras trailing behind, just a notepad in his pocket and a determination to hear their stories. That was the Harry who built Invictus brick by brick, who understood that for many veterans, recovery wasn't just about the body, it was about the spirit. Those memories have become almost nostalgic now, like flickering photographs of a prince who disappeared. And maybe that's why the public reaction to his recent silence has been so visceral. It's not just disappointment, it's grief. Grief for the potential he once embodied. Grief for the connection that once felt so unbreakable. 'Cause if Harry could walk away from the one cause that defined him, what did that say about the rest of us who believed in it? For veterans grappling with lifelong injuries and invisible wounds, Invictus wasn't just another charity event. It was proof that someone in the highest echelons of power understood their battles. Someone who'd seen the same darkness and refused to look away. So when Harry began to drift into a life of curated appearances and scripted interviews, the sense of betrayal felt personal. It was as if he'd joined the ranks of all those politicians and celebrities who promised to care but disappeared when the spotlight dimmed. And while the royal family has often been accused of coldness, of maintaining a polite distance from the pain of ordinary people, Harry once stood apart from that tradition. He was the prince who hugged the wounded without hesitation, who joked with amputees in the rehab gym, who cried with families grieving losses too profound for words. That was the bond that made Invictus more than just a brand. It made it a lifeline. And now that lifeline feels frayed beyond repair. Meanwhile, behind palace gates, frustration continues to simmer. According to insiders, King Charles doesn't see this as just a family squabble. He sees it as a dereliction of duty, because in the monarchy, appearances matter. They're not just ceremonial, they're symbolic. When a royal shows up, especially one who once wore the uniform, it sends a message that service isn't something you outgrow. That commitment doesn't end when your tour is over or when public opinion turns sour. But Harry's absence threatens to undermine that entire ethos. One longtime royal advisor confided that Charles feels personally insulted by Harry's refusal to confirm his attendance. For the king, it's a sign that Harry doesn't understand what it means to be part of an institution that outlasts individual grievances. He wants to pick and choose when he's royal, the advisor said, and you simply can't do that. The monarchy, for all its flaws, is built on consistency, on the unspoken agreement that personal feelings will always be secondary to duty. And in that regard, Harry has broken the contract. Even William, who has spent years absorbing the fallout from his brother's choices, has reached the end of his patience. Friends say the future king has grown weary of trying to smooth over the cracks. Every time he's offered Harry a chance to reconnect, it's been met with more memoir revelations, more accusations, more distance. And now, watching his brother hesitate over the games that once united them, William has drawn a hard line. According to those close to him, he doesn't see this as just another disappointment. He sees it as proof that Harry has chosen a different life, one that no longer includes the family or the values they once shared. But for all the anger and resentment swirling inside royal circles, it's the veterans who feel the most let down. In interviews, they rarely speak with venom or outrage. More often, their tone is something softer, sadder, a quiet resignation that the man who once championed their cause has moved on. One British soldier, who lost his leg in Afghanistan, described Invictus as the moment he felt proud to wear his uniform again. "Harry made us feel seen," he said, "not as broken men but as competitors, as warriors." Then he paused, his voice dropping. "Now it feels like we were just a stop on his way to something bigger." Those words echo in the minds of many who built the Invictus community alongside Harry, because they remember the early days, the scramble to find funding, the skepticism from skeptics who thought it would never take off. They remember the long hours of planning, the uncertainty, the triumph when the first games lit up London. And through it all, Harry was there, sleeves rolled up, determined to prove everyone wrong. That's the man they believed in. That's the man they want back. Even among the wider British public, there's a sense that Harry's evolution from soldier prince to California celebrity has come at a cost. Not just to his reputation but to the causes he once held dear. Opinion polls reveal a steep decline in trust. Where once he was among the most admired members of the royal family, now he hovers near the bottom. And while some blame the tabloids or the endless scrutiny, others point to choices he's made. Choices that suggest he'd rather cultivate his brand than honor the commitments he began. One former palace staffer put it bluntly, "The saddest part is he thinks he can rebuild credibility from Malibu. But service doesn't happen from a mansion. It happens when you show up." That sentiment has been echoed by countless voices online. Under every headline about Harry's silence, you'll find comments from veterans, military spouses, and everyday citizens all asking the same question. Where is he? That question has no satisfying answer, because despite all the speculation about security concerns or strategic planning, the simplest explanation may be the truest. He's afraid of facing the people who once cheered for him, afraid of seeing their disappointment reflected back at him, afraid of standing in the middle of a stadium and realizing that the applause has stopped. And perhaps most of all, afraid of admitting that some things can't be repaired with a well-placed press release or a sympathetic interview. Meanwhile, Meghan's absence has become an unspoken symbol of the Sussexes' new reality. In the early years of their marriage, she was a constant presence at Harry's side, smiling, waving, delivering speeches about unity and resilience. But now, as the games approach, her silence feels louder than any statement. Insiders insist she advised Harry to stay away, worried that another UK trip would reignite old controversies and damage their standing in America. And while that may be a sound strategy from a public relations perspective, it doesn't change the optics. To many, it looks like abandonment. For the veterans preparing to compete in Birmingham, it's a bitter pill to swallow. Because they know how much Invictus meant to Harry. They know how many lives it changed. And to see him distance himself now feels like watching a friend turn their back when you need them most. One wounded serviceman summed it up in a single sentence: "You can't claim to be our brother and then disappear." That sentiment has been picked up by the media too. The same newspapers that once praised Harry as a modernizer, as a breath of fresh air in a stuffy institution, now question whether he's become exactly what he once fought against: a privileged figure more interested in his own image than the causes he championed. Columnists write with a mix of pity and exasperation, wondering how a man who once seemed so genuine could lose his way so completely. Even in the United States, where Harry and Meghan have found a more sympathetic audience, there are signs the tide is turning. When Spotify walked away from their podcast deal, it wasn't just about ratings or revenue. It was about a broader sense that the couple's story had lost its power to inspire. The narrative of two royals breaking free to do good in the world was compelling, until it started to feel like a brand strategy instead of a mission. And without the authenticity that once set them apart, their public image has begun to feel hollow. Back in Britain, the anticipation around Invictus 2027 continues to build. Organizers, sponsors, and veterans all wait for clarity that never comes. Every time reporters ask whether Harry will attend, his representatives offer the same carefully worded non-answers. And every time, trust erodes a little more. Because for all the talk of security and logistics, everyone knows the truth. If Harry wanted to be there, he would be. That's the reality that no amount of PR spin can disguise. And as the opening ceremony draws closer, the stakes couldn't be higher. Because this isn't just about one event. It's about a man's legacy, about whether he can still claim to stand for something larger than himself, about whether the veterans who once saw him as a brother will recognize the man on that stage, or see a stranger in their midst. Clock is ticking and the choice is his alone. He can reclaim the respect he once earned, or he can watch it slip away for good. And if he chooses the latter, no amount of glossy interviews or sympathetic headlines will ever be enough to bring it back. Because when the history of Invictus is written, it won't just be about the games or the medals. It will be about the man who started it all, and whether he had the courage to finish what he began.